Pleasure tonight to introduce our speaker, and her name is Karina Austin. Karina is a registered dietitian at the BC Cancer Agency right here in Victoria. She grew up in Victoria and moved to Vancouver to pursue her degree in dietetics at UBC, the university there. After completing her degree, she worked for several years as a clinical dietitian at the Cancer Agency in Vancouver. And this March, she returned to Victoria, and she's working at the Cancer Agency here. And has been working at the Cancer Agency with the Prostate Cancer Support Care Program. Some of you here may even have met with her. It's all possible. She enjoys helping people living with prostate cancer to navigate the often confusing world of nutrition, and is passionate about supporting people to discover the foods that make them feel their best and that they can enjoy. So that sounds like a great offering for us to hear this, and please welcome Karina.
Hello. I do see a few familiar faces in the audience, so that's great. Thank you so much for inviting me to be here tonight. It really is a pleasure. Tonight, what I hope to do is address some of the most common questions that I hear, and hope to ease some of the confusion that some of you may have around diet, and hopefully reduce some anxiety around those food choices. I'm happy to take questions as they come up for you, so just wave your hand to get my attention. Now, of course, this is a group tonight, so there's only so much that we can cover. And I do believe that everyone's diet is individual, so I just want to make sure that all of you are aware that you're all able to access a dietitian for some individual advice. If you have further questions after tonight, or if you're dealing with any difficulties eating or bowel changes through your treatment. So to access that service, there's two ways you can do that. One is through the Prostate Cancer Support Care Program, and the contact phone number is there on this slide, and I believe we have it on the table in the entranceway as well. And then there's also an oncology dietitian at HealthLink BC, so that's the provincial telehealth service that you access by dialing 811. They have several different health professionals there, including dietitians, and there's one dietitian who focuses just on oncology. She's highly knowledgeable in the area of prostate cancer, so I'd encourage you to reach out to her. So just a little bit about what I do at the Prostate Cancer Supportive Care Program. So I run monthly group education sessions where I go over the basics of what kind of diet should you be eating after a diagnosis of prostate cancer, a little bit about symptom management, how your diet might change through treatment. So I invite you to join me there if you haven't already. Those are the upcoming dates for this month and next month. And you can contact Jessica at the Prostate Cancer Supportive Care Program to register, which is the same person to contact to arrange that one-on-one appointment. I also like to just point out another resource you have at your fingertips on the BC Cancer website at bccancer.bc.ca/nutritioninfo. We have all of our patient handouts there. So if you're dealing with any new symptoms, side effects from your treatment, and you're wondering if you need to change your diet, this can be a great starting place. We have handouts on how to manage things like diarrhea or low appetite. We also have our nutrition guide for men with prostate cancer available online. That's that purple and white booklet that was on the entrance table. Okay, so getting into why we're here, nutrition and cancer. So as Bill mentioned, eating well is important to help you feel your best. I think we can all reflect on times when we've eaten poorly over an extended period, and we can feel the change in our bodies in terms of our energy, perhaps changes in our bowels. There's also some really wonderful research coming out around the role diet can play in helping to put the odds in your favor to delay cancer progression or to prevent or reduce the risk of recurrence. Now, of course, diet is never a guarantee, but it's one of those things you have some control over to put the odds in your favor. And another important thing to consider is lowering your risk of other diseases. So things that might be particularly relevant to you are things like osteoporosis or heart disease, diabetes. So diet can certainly play an important role in those as well. Now, my goal for you is that I want you to be able to eat the healthiest diet that you can enjoy and maintain long term. I think enjoyment of food is such an important piece. And along with that is avoiding some of those very restrictive ways of eating that are not enjoyable, not going to be sustainable for you long term. And we know that they don't generally lead to better health outcomes. So I encourage you to make small changes and find something that you can enjoy and continue with. And finally, minimizing that stress around food choices. You're all going through a fairly stressful period of life. And I hate for food or making decisions around what you're going to eat would add more to that stress. So I thought I'd touch on just to acknowledge what influences our food choices, because it is complex. Of course, we're here today to talk about nutrition and what the research tells us are the right foods to be eating. However, there's so much more that comes into our decision around what we're going to put in our bodies. When we're hungry, when we're full, how food tastes, the cost of food, the convenience, so how busy is this period of your life, what are your friends and family eating, or what are they telling you that you should be eating? Maybe your weight is influencing your food choices, and there can be many more. And these are going to fluctuate with time, and different things are going to take are going to change in terms of what's the biggest priority for you at that moment, and that's okay. I wanted to take this opportunity to introduce the idea of mindful eating, because I think that sometimes we can get very caught up in the science of nutrition, and while of course as a dietitian I see the value in that, I think sometimes it can be helpful to go back to the basics and learn a little bit about ourselves and what's leading us to certain habits or certain ways of eating. So starting at the top there, why do I eat? It's a sort of an interesting question, not something that we think about on a daily basis. So are you eating because you feel hungry? Are you eating because you just turned on the TV and that's when you always pull out the snacks? And when do you eat? So similar lines, are you eating by the clock? Are you eating by your hunger? And what? So this is where your information about nutrition may come into play. It may be your taste buds. And how? I think this is an interesting one. Do you eat differently when you're by yourself? Or do you eat differently when you're out with other people? And then how do you determine how much to eat? Do you stop eating when your plate's empty? Do you stop eating when you feel full? How do you know if you feel full? And it can be an interesting learning opportunity to sort of cue into your hunger. How hungry are you? How does it feel when you're full? How does it feel when you eat too much? And we're all going to have times when we overeat because it's Christmas dinner and it's just delicious, or it's a birthday, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I think if you start to pay attention to how that feels in your body, you might start to notice that, actually, I'm not going to enjoy that second piece of cake, because even though it tastes good, I'm really going to feel not that great afterwards. And then after you've nourished your body with whatever those foods are that you've chosen, what are you going to do with all that fuel and that energy? So that's where some movement may come in, or mental energy and how you're going to use that. So if this is something that speaks to you, there's a lot of information about this online, but I just encourage you to take a step back and just experience your food in a different way. So today I really wanted to focus on those common questions. I will talk a little bit about the overview of a diet that I recommend, but I do go into this in more detail in the PCSC presentation. So rather than to repeat myself, I thought I'd dive into these questions that I'm assuming are on some of your minds as well. So first, sugar. Who's had this question? Will sugar feed my cancer? Yeah. Yeah. So I guess first we need to define, what do we mean by sugar? So sometimes when people use that word, they're talking about added sugars, so sugars that are added in pops or desserts, candies. But it can also be used to when we're talking about carbohydrates in general. So carbohydrates is sort of the larger term that encompasses those simple sugars, but also grains, starchy vegetables, fruits, dairy, beans and lentils all have those type of carbohydrates or starches. Now those sugars that are refined, so white sugar, brown sugar, all those ones that are added into our processed foods, those are what we call simple sugars. And what that means is that they're very easy for our bodies to digest, and those sugars enter the bloodstream quite quickly. As compared to something like fruit or a piece of whole grain bread, oatmeal, those all contain carbohydrates which are broken down into a type of sugar called glucose in the digestive system, which is also absorbed into our bloodstream for fuel. But this process happens more slowly. It takes the body a little bit longer, and as a result we don't tend to see the same rapid increases in blood sugar that we get with those added or simple sugars. So what's the answer? Well, it's not black and white. So we know that all the cells in our body, cancer cells, healthy cells, they all prefer to use glucose, which is a form of sugar, for energy or fuel. So what do you do with that information? Well, my recommendation is that most people would benefit from limiting added sugars in their diet, but that we have no evidence to say that following a 100% sugar-free diet is going to be better for your health. So I suggest you can use small amounts of added sugars to make those healthier foods more enjoyable. So perhaps some honey or maple syrup on your oatmeal, or added to your salad dressings, your sauces, and so on. And then allowing yourself to be able to enjoy those treats when you want to. And so then usually the next question is, well, okay, so how many cookies can I eat a week? Give me some solid numbers. And I don't have a solid number for you because the research doesn't tell us those type of details. But I find that it can be helpful to keep the rule of 80-20 in mind. Has anyone heard that before? So what that's referring to is 80% of the time, you make your choices based on foods that are going to help fuel your body, nutritious, healthy, whole foods. And 20% of the time, maybe you make your choices more on flavor and taste. Now that ratio might look a little different for you, but that's the general concept. Most of the time, you nourish your body with healthy, whole foods. And then when you enjoy those treats that make you feel good, because you're able to participate in the family activities, the social gatherings, you don't feel guilt or stress about that. I don't recommend that people follow a low carbohydrate diet. We do have a lot of evidence that a diet that's rich in fruits and vegetables, whole grains, beans and lentils, is a sort of cancer-fighting type of diet that's recommended for everyone. And those foods are naturally high in those complex carbohydrates. Did that answer the question about sugar? Yeah, okay. So going from sugar, often the next question is, okay, but I've been hearing about this keto diet. Who's heard of the ketogenic diet? A lot of hands are going up. So for anyone who's not familiar with this, ketogenic diet is an extremely high-fat diet. It has a moderate amount of protein, and it's very low in carbohydrates. So there's sort of a little picture here of some examples of foods that would fit on that diet. So those high-fat foods, nuts, avocados, some protein, but you're not seeing any starches there. This diet has been used for decades successfully to treat epilepsy in some situations, and is considered a medical therapy that is successful. And in last couple of years, there's been a lot of interest in cancer. There's been a lot of interest in its role in weight loss, in diabetes. So, what do we know about cancer and ketogenic diet? Well, the verdict is still out. I can tell you that research is ongoing, but we don't really have any evidence to show that it's helpful. And you might hear the terms the true ketogenic diet versus a modified ketogenic diet. So what that's referring to is the true ketogenic diet is the type of diet that someone with epilepsy would be put on. So it's very, very restricted in carbohydrates. A so-called modified ketogenic diet is a little more liberal. So it allows a little bit more carbohydrates, but it's still quite high in fat. So we don't know. We don't have evidence that either of these are helpful at this time. Now, the things that stand out for me in this diet, or concerns that I might have if someone were interested in this, is that the diet can be quite high in saturated fats, in red meats, and in processed meats. Now, it doesn't have to be, but a lot of people following this diet tend to include a lot of high-fat dairy and a lot of meats in their intake. It can be low in fiber because you've cut out grains, you've cut out beans and lentils, you've cut out fruits, most fruits. So some people have some negative effects on their bowels. So if this is something that you feel strongly and passionate about, that you want to try it, then I would encourage that you seek out some advice from a dietitian who has a lot of knowledge in the ketogenic diet, so that you can get some help to make sure that you're still meeting all your nutrition needs and eating the healthiest diet you can to not increase your risk of heart disease and other conditions. I will say that a lot of foods that are restricted on this diet are things that we have evidence for that are helpful. So the whole grains, the beans and lentils, the fruits, all of these things have a lot of evidence behind them. So just being aware that this diet does restrict those, and so that's one of the main reasons I don't encourage it at this time. Any other questions about keto? All right.
I'm just wondering about the parallels with keto and the Atkins diet that was out 10 years ago, which a lot of people were having cardiac issues with.
Mm-hmm.
Have you seen any parallels there with the two?
I haven't. So the question was, is there, when the Atkins diet was popular, there were things cropping up about people having issues with heart disease. And so the question was, has this been seen with the ketogenic diet as well? I'm not aware. I haven't seen that myself. But I can certainly see in a ketogenic diet that's not well planned that there would certainly be that potential or that concern. I would also think about, how long is someone going to be on this diet? So if this is something that someone plans to stick to for years, then, I would expect that would have a longer term impact on things like heart disease, as opposed to someone who is, trying it out for a few weeks. Mm-hmm. Okay. So I also get asked about intermittent fasting. So what this refers to is taking different periods of time, and there's different methods out there where you don't eat, so you fast. So some popular examples are you eat like you normally do for 5 days of the week, and for 2 days of the week, you don't eat at all. Or you fast for 16 hours a day, and then eat all your food in an 8-hour period. So again, this is sort of a new area, and there really isn't much research on cancer. There is evidence that for some people this helps them to lose weight. And this makes sense if we think about it, because if you don't eat for 2 days of the week, you're probably going to take in fewer calories over the course of that week. Or if you're restricted your eating to 8 hours a day versus maybe you normally eat over 12, perhaps you're missing out on a meal every day. So that goes back to that calorie restriction. So for some people, this can be a way that they're successful in losing weight and losing excess body fat has been shown to improve many health markers. So we may see some benefits from that perspective. But I don't think that this is a diet that's for everyone. I would have particular concerns for anyone with diabetes, anyone who's just struggling through treatment or having a lot of bowel concerns. But certainly something that some people are considering. There's also interest in how it might impact the effectiveness of cancer treatment, and we're not there in the research, so I can't give you any information on that. All right. So what supplements should I be taking now that I have been diagnosed with cancer? This is pretty common, and the amount of people that are taking supplements is very high. I would be curious in this room, how many people take a supplement every day? Yeah, so pretty much everyone. So there's many reasons why you might take a supplement, but specifically with cancer, we don't recommend it for preventing cancer, treating cancer, or preventing your cancer from coming back. And that's because we have not seen any good evidence that there are supplements out there that help to slow cancer growth or stop it from growing to begin with. Now, specific with prostate cancer, there have been a lot of interest in selenium and vitamin E supplements. So there was a large study that was done several years ago where they had a large group of healthy men, and they provided them with a selenium supplement or a vitamin E supplement or a placebo. So they had 3 groups of people. And they had to stop this study because they actually found that the men who were given the selenium supplement or the vitamin E supplement seemed to have a higher risk of developing prostate cancer. So this is looking at people before they were diagnosed. We don't have as much evidence for, well, what happens if I take this supplement after I'm diagnosed? But based on that significant finding and its interaction with developing prostate cancer, I would advise all men with prostate cancer not to take those supplements. If you're taking a multivitamin, the amount is usually quite small, so I wouldn't be too concerned about that. And then another important point is anyone who is undergoing radiation therapy or chemotherapy, you're probably going to be advised by your doctor or your nurses to stop any antioxidant supplements while you're on treatment. So just keep that in mind and just let your team know what supplements you're taking so they can advise you if you need to stop those. So what should you take? Well, most people in the room would benefit from a vitamin D supplement, particularly if you are on androgen deprivation therapy or have otherwise been told you're at high risk of osteoporosis. I usually recommend 1,000 international units is a good amount for most people, and that's a very standard dose that you'll find in the pharmacy. And any other vitamin or mineral supplement should really be used on an individual basis to treat a deficiency. So if your doctor's told you you're iron deficient, vitamin B12 deficient, then absolutely you should take those supplements to treat that deficiency. Or in some situations, if you know that you're not meeting your needs from your diet, then there can be a role for a small dose supplement to top you up to meeting your needs. So a good example is calcium. So there's probably some people in the room that have been told that it's really important to get enough calcium for their bone health, right? So my guidance on calcium is that you want to try to get enough from your diet first, if you can. And then if you know that you really can't meet your needs from your diet, then you want to take a low dose calcium supplement just to bridge that gap from how much you're eating to bring you up to the amount that you need. Now in those nutrition guides that were out on the front table, they have in there, they go through how much you need, where you can get calcium in your diet to help you figure that out. Any other supplement questions? Yes.
I want to go back to the antioxidant supplements.
Mm-hmm.
What is the relationship between that and radiation therapy? And are there some identifiable side effects from that?
I wouldn't anticipate you to have any side effects during your treatment. The concern is that antioxidants, their purpose, or the reason they're good for us, is that they help to protect cells from damage. The concern is, while you're on treatment and taking high doses of antioxidant supplements, could these supplements, they're rich in antioxidants, be providing any kind of protective effect on the cancer cells, therefore reducing the effect of the cancer treatment. Yeah. Now, if you're wondering now about your blueberries on your breakfast cereal, food sources of antioxidants are just fine. So you don't need to restrict fruits, vegetables, or any other foods that you're eating, just those high dose supplements. Similarly, a multivitamin is generally considered safe because the amounts are much lower than in those single nutrient supplements. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a question about zinc.
Oh yeah.
I've heard zinc is really good for men's health, most specifically for erectile function.
Mm.
Do you have any knowledge around that, or seen any literature?
I haven't read anything about erectile dysfunction, but that is something I would love to look into. As a more general comment, zinc is absolutely an important nutrient, and I'm thinking that anyone who's experienced some diarrhea or more loose kind of frequent bowel movements, you do lose more zinc in that way, so you are at higher risk of deficiency. Zinc is particularly rich in those protein foods, so both the animal proteins and the beans and lentils and nuts and seeds. So most people, if they're eating a pretty varied diet, can meet kind of their daily requirements, but could be something to look at if you're having a lot of losses. Yeah, and I'll look into that question. Thanks, Connie. Okay. So what about turmeric? Who uses turmeric in their kitchen? Yeah. What about turmeric or curcumin supplement? Is anyone taking those? One person? Yeah. So, will adding turmeric to my diet slow the growth of my cancer? So its role in cancer growth is unknown. So I bet you're probably starting to think, oh, there's a lot she doesn't know. Nutrition research is pretty complicated because we don't eat the same food every day. And then when you throw cancer into the mix, human studies are hard to do. So for a lot of these topics, turmeric included, there have been studies done in a lab. So where they have cancer cells in a test tube, and they have seen some anti-cancer properties in turmeric. We also know that turmeric is anti-inflammatory. It's an antioxidant, but we don't have any human studies to show a significant benefit. Now, we know that in many countries, like in India, for example, turmeric is a very significant part of the diet. And they estimate that people in India consume about a teaspoon of turmeric every day, just as part of their normal cooking. So what you can take from that is, this is a population that's been eating this for a long time, so it's considered safe when eaten in food quantities. So I do not see any risks with consuming turmeric. And because of its anti-inflammatory properties, its antioxidant properties, absolutely, I would encourage you to use it in your foods. So you can buy dried turmeric, or you can buy fresh turmeric. That's what turmeric comes as a root. Some grocery stores do carry it. And then you can grate it and use it fresh if you wish. or it will freeze. So you can pop the whole root in the freezer and then just grate it when you want to use it. Some obvious places to use it are curries or soups. Has anyone heard of golden milk? It's become a bit of a trendy item. You might see it at certain coffee shops. This is essentially some kind of steamed milk where they've added turmeric to it to give it that golden color. Sometimes it will have honey or some other sweetener in it or other spices. But this is certainly another way you can try it out as a hot drink at home. You can throw it into smoothies. I've heard of people stirring it into their hummus or other sauces, salad dressings, etc. Interestingly, black pepper and fat helps our body to absorb those healthful compounds that are in turmeric. And this is how it's traditionally consumed in India, which I think is pretty interesting. So added to curries and stews, usually sauteed with some kind of ghee or oil of some type, and there's usually some black pepper in the mix there.
This is sort of a global question that you may get to later, but wondering about raw versus cooked with the various foods that you mentioned.
Yeah, foods in general, or like fruits and vegetables in general, or...
Yeah, like some foods that are rich in vitamin C, if you cook them, you destroy it.
Right.
Are we looking at that sort of thing with garlic, which most of us eat cooked as opposed to raw? Ginger as well, have it in a tea or cooked, but we don't usually eat too much of it raw.
No.
But is there any loss of nutrients
it's a really
for
good
these?
question. So the question was around how does cooking influence the nutrients in our food? So certain nutrients like vitamin C, those water-soluble vitamins can be lost in the cooking process, whereas there are others that actually are improved through the cooking process. So has anyone heard of lycopene? Yeah. So lycopene is that red pigment in tomatoes. It becomes more available if we cook the tomatoes. But the tomatoes also contain vitamin C, which we might lose a little bit of if we cook. So what do we do with that? So my advice is generally a bit of a mix. So that's how most of us eat, right? Most of us eat a combination of, we have some raw fruits and veggies, we have some cooked. So I feel that in that way you can get sort of the best of both worlds. And I also believe that the amount of, say, vitamin C that we might lose in the cooking process is not significant enough to impact our health. We're not losing all the vitamin C in that food, for example. Does that answer your question?
Yep.
Yeah. There's just a couple concerns with turmeric. So if you're at risk of kidney stones or you have any gallbladder conditions, then you do want to avoid high doses or a supplement of the turmeric. And because turmeric is an antioxidant, then we do advise to avoid a supplement while you're on radiation or chemotherapy. And I just like to point out, turmeric's not alone in foods that can be added for flavor to boost the antioxidant, anti-inflammatory properties. So garlic and ginger are pretty widely used, and those are also healthful. Okay, dairy. This is quite a hot topic in prostate cancer, and that is because there has been a possible link established between people who consume high intakes of calcium or dairy. So that's quite excessive amounts, so greater than 2,000 milligrams of calcium, or in the range of like 6 servings of dairy a day. So quite a lot, more than the average person is consuming. That in that group of people, you do see a higher risk of developing prostate cancer. There is some weak evidence that maybe there's a link between people who are consuming a lot of full-fat dairy products and the progression of their disease, but it's not very strong. So what do I recommend? I want to make sure that everyone is getting enough calcium in their diets. So for some people, dairy does provide a pretty significant source of calcium. So being aware that if you're reducing the amount of dairy that you're consuming, or eliminating it altogether, that you want to make sure you're replacing that with other calcium-rich foods. So some examples would be choosing a non-dairy milk that's fortified with calcium, so like a soy milk or an almond milk. Most of the ones in the grocery store will be fortified with calcium, but there's a few that are not. So you just want to check your label. So look at the nutrition facts table, and it should have about 30% of your calcium needs per day per cup. Lots of plant foods are rich in calcium as well, so certain beans, greens like kale, spinach, also some nuts and seeds, specifically almonds and sesame seeds. So there are other ways you can meet your needs, but it might just take a little more planning or a little more intention. List of those foods are in that nutrition guide for you as well. If you enjoy dairy, then I do not see any evidence that you need to avoid it altogether. I just recommend you limit to no more than an average of 2 or 3 servings per day. A serving would be a cup of milk, 3/4 of a cup of yogurt, about 50 grams of cheese, which is sort of the size of 2 thumbs. And most of the time choosing that lower fat dairy, so under 2% milk or yogurt. And what about eggs? This is another hot topic in prostate cancer. So should I be avoiding them or limiting them? How many am I allowed to eat? Are they good? Are they bad? Everyone keeps changing their mind. So with prostate cancer, there have been 3 small studies that have been done looking at people after a diagnosis of prostate cancer. If they eat a lot of eggs, does that increase their risk of progression? They have those 3 studies. 2 of them found that people who ate the most eggs were more likely to have their prostate cancer progress. The other study found no link at all. Now this is only a link, so it's not necessarily a cause. And it makes it hard to interpret, right? And these were small studies, and we're not seeing completely consistent results. So what I recommend is, first of all, I want everyone to be eating a pretty varied diet. So I don't really suggest that you're eating the exact same thing every day. So if you're someone who eats 2 eggs for breakfast every morning, then I'd recommend that you switch it up and maybe alternate every other day. And the other days you could have oatmeal or some other, hot cereal. We also have a lot of evidence that plant-based proteins are really helpful for us. So can you incorporate more of those plant-based proteins and reduce your egg consumption? That can be a good approach. But I don't feel strongly or recommend to everyone that they need to stop eating eggs altogether. Moderation, like so many other things, is important. So will eating soy or flax slow my cancer growth, or will it help to lower my PSA? This is a common question I hear. Along similar lines, sort of the opposite, I sometimes hear, is soy going to make my cancer grow? So there can sometimes be some fear around soy as well. So first for soy, I just like to make it clear that yes, soy is safe to eat. Sometimes people have concerns because soy and flax are rich in something called phytoestrogens. That just means plant-based estrogens. But these don't work the same in our body as human estrogens. So it's not going to make hormone-sensitive cancers grow faster. There's been some research looking at how it might influence PSA, and they haven't been finding significant results. So some studies have shown that the PSA in people who are regularly consuming soy might go down a little bit, but it's not significant enough that they can make a conclusion. However, soy is a very healthy food. So it's rich in protein, it's rich in fiber. We see that people who replace some of their animal proteins with soy foods they can have a benefit of lower cholesterol levels. We can see benefits in terms of blood sugar control. So I do encourage soy as part of the diet, even if we don't know how it might impact your PSA. And I like to remind people, soy is more than tofu. So there's soy milk is a nice option if you're not wanting to drink cow's milk. Edamame, anyone had that in a Japanese restaurant or maybe at home? So that can sometimes be a little less scary than cooking a block of tofu at home. If anyone's been to my group session, then you might have tried roasted edamame. I always bring some with me. These you can find in the bulk food section of, I always get them at Save On Foods, but I think some other grocery stores have them as well. These are dry roasted edamame, so they are crunchy, sort of like peanuts or nuts. You can get them lightly salted, so you can mix those into your trail mix or put them on your salad. Right, what about flax? So similarly to soy, there is some interest in how this could impact prostate cancer growth and PSA, but they really haven't done much research in people who have prostate cancer. But there's a possible link there. Flax is also very healthy food. People can see some benefits in terms of their bowel function. The seed is rich in those anti-inflammatory omega-3 fats, which you might have heard about, and many other nutrients. So this is, again, a nice food to incorporate into the diet. Flax is a very hard little seed, so if we don't grind it, then it leaves our body just like it enters. And so we don't get the benefit of those healthy fats or some of those nutrients. So I would grind it first. Just be aware that once you ground any nut or seed, it will go rancid more quickly. So I would just grind it in sort of smaller amounts and store it in the fridge or the freezer until you're going to use it. Okay. So if soy and flax, we're not so sure about those, is there anything else I need to be eating to help lower my PSA? So I mentioned lycopene earlier. So lycopene is that red pigment that's in tomatoes, but it's also in some other red fruits. Not all of them, but just the ones that are listed there. Studies with lycopene have found some mixed results. So there's some that have found a benefit, and some studies have not been able to confirm that, so they haven't seen a benefit. But similar to a lot of these other foods, there's no reason to think that this is going to be harmful to be including tomatoes in your diet regularly. So I encourage you to enjoy them and eat them regularly. You came up earlier about cooking, so lycopene is more available if you cook the tomatoes, and also include some fat with that meal. So I like a tomato sauce that you've prepared with some olive oil, or a soup, or some kind of stew where there's been some fat added to it is a great way to do it. Pomegranate has also been something of interest. They haven't found that it does impact PSA. However, it does fit into that category of a fruit and vegetable, so it can definitely be part of the diet. Pomegranate juice was quite popular for a while because we're not seeing an impact specifically with the PSA. Just like any other juice, I would suggest that most of the time you choose that whole fruit or that whole vegetable over the juice. Cruciferous vegetables. So this is that broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage family. There's been a lot of interest around their anti-cancer properties. All these vegetables share sort of a bitter kind of sulfur taste to them, and it's that sulfur component that's thought to be a particularly strong anti-cancer compound. There is some one small study that was done in people after a diagnosis of prostate cancer that found men who ate the most cruciferous vegetables lived longer, and it might have some benefit for their prostate cancer. So even though that's a small study, again, unlikely to have harm from eating more broccoli. So, so I would encourage you to do so. And what's nice is it's a pretty big group. I'm seeing some, maybe there is some harm. So you don't have to eat broccoli, but hopefully there's at least one food in this group that you do like, and that you could incorporate as part of your diet. You can eat it raw, you can eat it cooked, whatever way is going to be easy for you to eat it regularly and eat a good amount of it. One thing that does come up occasionally for men who are going through radiation therapy is they can have some difficulties with gas, and you might be told to go on a diet that avoids some common gas-forming foods. So these vegetables will be on that list. So you might need to avoid them temporarily for that reason. Otherwise, if you do get a lot of gas when you eat these vegetables and it's uncomfortable for you, then make sure you're drinking lots of fluid. That will help your body to work that gas through and help your body to digest it. And increase your intake of these slowly. So if probably any of us were to go home and eat 6 cups of broccoli, we'd be feeling pretty bloated. So just acknowledge what your body and your GI tract is used to, and start with a small amount and then increase from there as your body adapts. Fish is another food that has had some interest. We don't know if there's a link between prostate cancer and fish intake, but we're not seeing any of the same negative impacts that we see with some other proteins like processed meats and red meats. And fish the fatty fish in particular are excellent sources of those anti-inflammatory omega-3 fats, which many of us don't get enough of. And it's been shown to be helpful for heart health and other factors. So if you enjoy fish and it's part of your diet, then I would encourage you to consume it a couple of times per week. All right, so now the big question. So what should I be eating? What diet should I be following? So I hope this doesn't come as a surprise at the end, that the diet that I recommend for most of you is going to be a diet that's rich in vegetables, fruits, fish, legumes, and whole grains. So kind of the 4 pillars of that are eating more plant-based foods, less animal foods, but we have no evidence to say that you need to become a strict vegetarian or vegan, but it's just incorporating more of those plants. Eat a diet that's minimally processed, so kind of going back to the basics with food, and focus on healthy fats. So reducing your intake of those saturated fats that are usually found in meats and high-fat dairy, and instead focusing on those omega-3 fats in fish, certain nuts and seeds like the flax we talked about, and walnuts, and then all other plant oils, so olive oil and other nuts and seeds, avocados, all of those are good for our health. And I do say that I went through this, yeah.
Maybe you can give us a quick rundown on fats. Fats is always one of those things that I look at and say, is it a healthy fat or isn't it? And
okay, so the question is just to provide a bit of an overview around fats and how to figure out if something's a healthy fat or not. So one helpful way would be to look at the fat and is it solid or liquid at room temperature. So fats that are solid at room temperature, like butter or lard, coconut oil, these are saturated fats. So these are the types of fats that we want to limit. Now again, it doesn't mean we need to avoid them 100% of the time, but we don't want to choose those as our everyday cooking oil or cooking fat. Fats that are liquid at room temperature, so that's most of your vegetable oils, olive oil, flaxseed oil, avocado oil, etc. Those are all liquid at room temperature, so that means that they're mostly unsaturated fats and are better for our heart. Now, unsaturated fats can further be divided into a few subcategories. So omega-3 fats are one type of unsaturated fat. And you might have heard of omega-6, yeah. And you might have heard of monounsaturated fats that are in olive oil, for example. So all of these are essential. We want to get a combination of these in our diet, but as a population, we know that most of us get too much of the omega-6 fats and not enough of the omega-3. So that's why I brought up those omega-3 fats a few times. So rather than focusing too much on what to avoid, can we just kind of work in more of those omega-3 fats into the day? So that's the fish, the ground flaxseed, walnuts, hemp hearts, chia seeds, and the oils of those nuts and seeds, so walnut oil, flaxseed oil, etc. And then the omega-6 fats that we probably could do with a little bit less of are a lot of the kind of standard vegetable oils you'll see, the soy oil, the peanut oil, etc., that are in a lot of our kind of processed foods as well. And then those monounsaturated fats that are in avocados and olives, like the olive oil, those are a great heart-healthy fat as well. So for most people, olive oil is a great kind of everyday purpose oil for most of your cooking. A lot of people like to have a secondary oil that's a little bit more neutral in flavor, that maybe they use for higher temperature cooking or in places where they don't want that olive taste. So something like avocado or grapeseed or canola could be a good choice. There's a lot of other options out there as well, though. Yeah.
Well, what about coconut oil?
Yeah, good question. So coconut oil. Coconut oil is in that class of saturated fat. So you'll see that it is solid at room temperature, at least in the winter. So it has been quite popular and has been given a bit of a health halo. There is some evidence to show that the saturated fats in plants, like coconut, are probably not as bad for us as the saturated fats that are in animal foods, but they're still not as good for us as those other unsaturated fats. So coconut milk, coconut oil, whole coconut, that's all fine to be consuming once in a while, but I wouldn't choose coconut oil as your everyday cooking oil. Yeah.
Beaten to death, the fat one. What about the comparison between margarine and types of margarine and butter? Butter is one of those interesting things that in the summer, it's virtually a liquid sitting on your table. During the winter, it's rock hard.
Yeah, so the question was about margarine versus butter. So my consensus on this would be that it comes down to personal preference. So margarine's generally going to be it's going to be higher in unsaturated fats. It's going to have a better fat profile. Butter is going to be higher in saturated fats, so we do want to limit how much butter we're consuming. But if you're saving butter for places where you're really going to appreciate the flavor, then I think that that's very reasonable. And if you're only using a small amount of margarine or a small amount of butter, probably at the end of the day, it's not going to make a huge impact on your health. Now, this might be a little different for some people if they're dealing with really high cholesterol levels, or they have a lot of risk factors for heart disease, and maybe you need to be a little bit more strict around that saturated fat intake. But generally, small amounts of butter would be okay, and likewise margarine, whatever you prefer.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I understand what you had to say about sugar earlier.
Yeah.
The question that comes to mind now is, what about salt?
Yeah, good question. So the question is, what about salt? So I'm guessing this is around how much we should be eating and should we be restricting it?
And real salt, like sea salt and
Oh, yeah.
some of the refined stuff.
Okay, so what's the difference between the sea salt versus the table salt that we get? So first question around how much or should we be restricting? Yes, most of us do consume too much salt. Now what we know is that the majority of Canadians, about 3/4 of the salt that we consume comes from salt that's added outside of our homes. The actual amount of salt we're adding in our cooking or adding at the table for most people is providing a very small amount of our daily intake. So the biggest change I would say you can make around reducing your salt intake is to cook more at home. So relying less on restaurant, takeout, or pre-made food. So things like pre-made options in the grocery store that kind of speed up our cooking, like pre-made pasta sauces, pre-made salad dressings, pre-made soups. These can be the biggest culprits for those grocery store items, other than the obvious salty snacks. So I would encourage you to read your labels on those products. Salt or sodium is required to be on the nutrition facts table, so you can use that to help you decide between which brand of soup you might purchase. Of course, if you have the time and the availability to cook it from scratch, you can, but that might not be realistic, in which case I would go for the lowest sodium option that you can purchase. And then I would think about, could you bulk this soup, say it's a canned soup, could you bulk it up or in essence dilute it so that you're spreading out those that amount of salt over more servings. So for example, you take your canned chunky soup, could you add a cup of vegetables to that? Or a cup of unsalted cooked beans or lentils, or maybe some leftover brown rice you have in the fridge. So you're making 2 servings instead of 1, so cutting the amount of salt in half. Now your question about sea salt versus table salt, or that
Iodized
salt, yeah. So the key difference to note there is that sea salt does not need to be iodized, so that means they don't need to add iodine to it. Table salt, by law, must be iodized, so it has iodine added. Iodine would be a nutrient of concern if you were a strict vegan or vegetarian. Iodine is found in animal foods, so dairy and meats and fish, and of course like sea vegetables as well. So, if you're eating a variety of those foods, I probably wouldn't be concerned about your iodine levels. But if you are severely restricting those animal foods, then I would suggest that actually a table salt would be better for that iodine.
Would the product kelp contain a lot of salt?
It will. So any kind of seaweed product will have some salt in it, and probably will have some iodine, but it's going to vary quite a bit from. It's going to be hard to really estimate how much.
Thank you.
Yeah. I think we're just about at the end here. So this is just another visual to help you kind of put together what we've spoken about. So this is Canada's new food guide. I don't know if anyone recognizes it. And it actually aligns really well with the recommendations for cancer survivors and people living with cancer. So you can see that half the plate here is full of fruits and vegetables. So if you take one thing home, it's eat lots of fruits and vegetables. The other half of the plate is divided between your whole grains and your protein food. And you'll see that emphasis on more of those plant-based proteins, the beans and lentils and so on. And then eating a minimally processed diet. So I just had this up here again in case you needed the contact information for the Prostate Cancer Supportive Care Program in those upcoming sessions. And then were there any final lingering questions? Did I cover them all?
How good you were, we don't.
Where are the sessions being held?
So these are at BC Cancer, just across the way there, yeah. Now if these dates don't work for you, but you're interested, the session is recorded and available online as well. It won't be me that you see, it'll be my colleague in Vancouver who does the same presentation there. So you can watch that at your leisure online.
One quick question about sweets.
Yes.
In terms of dates or say honey or manuka honey or things like that.
Yeah. So
Are they okay for the body? A certain, in moderation?
Yeah, so the question is around using natural sweeteners, right,
Right.
in desserts. So things like dates or honey, manuka honey specifically. So when we eat anything with carbohydrates, so any type of sugar or starchy food, by the time that enters our bloodstream, our body doesn't know where it's come from. So when we eat a piece of fruit, or when we eat like a date, some honey, some white sugar, that is broken down in our intestine, digested into small molecules called glucose, which are then absorbed into the bloodstream. And then our cells use that glucose for energy. So it doesn't impact sort of the fuel source. What it does do is impacts how quickly things are digested and absorbed. So anything that is less refined, so a fruit, for example, a whole fruit, is more work for our body to break down, right? When you just look at it, you can kind of tell that's going to be some effort. Versus jelly bean. That's very simple and easy for the body to deal with. So it's going to be digested and broken up more quickly and enter the bloodstream more quickly. And that can result in, you might have heard of blood sugar spike, or sort of like a high blood sugar. Whereas a fruit or something kind of more of a whole food is going to be digested and absorbed more gradually, and you're not going to see that same high blood sugar. Now, around desserts and using those natural sweeteners, so I would say that the benefit to using something like dates as a sweetener is not only do you get that sweetness, but you also get some fiber and some other nutrients, maybe some benefits on the bowel function. So absolutely, I think that's a good option. It is still high in sugars, so if you're someone who is dealing with high blood sugars because you're diabetic, it's not something you can completely discount and ignore, but absolutely I would say it's a better choice than, say, a white sugar. Something like honey or maple syrup is still quite easy for our body to digest, so I don't think that there would be a significant difference in how that's digested than a refined sugar. However, it has more flavor to it, so I often find people use less because it has a lot of taste on its own, so you might not feel the need to add quite as much. There's also sort of the comment around, well, doesn't maple syrup and honey, they have some minerals in them, so it's got to be better for me than the white stuff. And while that's true, it has more minerals in it, I would argue that the amount of honey or maple syrup that you're going to eat is not going to be a significant contributor of minerals in your diet, so I would look elsewhere for those.
You haven't talked about beverages
Yeah.
as a factor to consider.
Absolutely. So the question is around beverages. Was there a specific beverage you had in
Well,
mind?
I think I've cut out coffee. I'm on herbal teas instead, right?
Yeah. Okay.
Liquor,
Yeah.
those things.
So coffee, tea, herbal teas, alcohol. So alcohol is one that we do advise you to limit. So the recommendations from the World Cancer Research Fund is it's best not to drink at all if you can. When I say that, it's often met with some faces. That's not going to fly. So then you want to reduce your intake. So for men, the guideline is, if you can stay under 2 drinks a day. And remembering what we call a drink would be a 5-ounce pour of wine, or an 1.5 ounces of hard liquor, or a 12-ounce of 5% alcohol beer. The other question is coffee. So for most people, coffee is fine to be consuming if you wish. I recommend you stay within the caffeine guidelines from Health Canada, which is no more than 3 to 4 cups of coffee a day. The only consideration would be caffeine can be a bowel stimulant, so if you're dealing with any bowel issues, diarrhea, etc., then that would be a possible trigger to explore. And herbal teas are generally fine as well. Yeah.
I'd rather talk about chocolate, but I'd like to ask about prebiotics and probiotics.
Sure. I just want to check in, I'm not cutting into, is it right? Okay. So questions about prebiotics and probiotics. So probiotics are the kind of good bacteria. So you can buy probiotic supplements, or you can buy yogurts that are rich in probiotics, kefir, other fermented products like sauerkraut, kombucha. These are all going to have probiotics in them. We all have millions probably of kind of healthy bacteria living in our gut right now. And we know that those bacteria are essential for our gut health. And there's been a lot of interest in their role in immune function and other benefits as well that we're still learning more about. Prebiotics are the food for the probiotics. So they're the food for the bacteria. So those are fermentable kind of carbohydrates and fibers that are found in a lot of plant foods. So you can get prebiotic supplements as well, but most people don't require those. If you're eating a diet that's rich in plants, you're getting lots of fiber, you're feeding that gut bacteria. Now, if you're wondering if you should be on a probiotic supplement, I don't think everyone needs to be on one all the time. There's certainly some indications, such as if you've recently been on antibiotics, probiotics can be used to help to prevent antibiotic-related diarrhea, or to help to restore normal gut flora after that course of antibiotics. There's also some indications for certain gut conditions, like if you suffer from IBS or IBD, other bowel diseases. But for cancer specifically, we don't have a general statement, so I would say it would depend on the person.
Good, thank you.
You're welcome. Please.
Yes, I wonder about dodgy food. Is there any evidence that dodgy food is not good or is good for your health?
Sorry, what kind of food?
Dodgy food?
Dodgy food?
Yeah.
Starchy?
Oh, starchy,
Starchy?
thank you. Starchy, okay. So the question is starchy food, and is there any evidence that that's not good for our health? Yeah, so that would tie in back to that question around sugar and carbohydrates. So starchy foods, breads, grains, potatoes, all of those have carbohydrates in them. And they're going to be broken down into glucose or fuel for our cells. So my advice around starchy foods is that you want to choose the starchy foods that are richer in fiber and nutrients. So for grains, that would be choosing the whole grains. So whole grain bread, brown rice, oatmeal, as opposed to white pastas and white rice. Those higher fiber or whole grains are going to be digested more slowly and prevent those high blood sugars and be beneficial to the gut health and to feeding those healthy bacteria in our gut as well. So you do not need to be limiting them, but there can be opportunities to make healthier choices within that category. The amount or kind of the ratio of your meal can be relevant as well. So if we just go back to this plate here, you can see that the big emphasis is on those kind of non-starchy vegetables and fruit. So we want to make sure we're getting a lot of those in at every meal. And then the starchy vegetables and the whole grains are still an important piece, but we don't want them to take up 3/4 of the plate.
Are sweet potatoes or yams a starchy food?
They are, yeah. So starchy vegetables would be the sweet potatoes, yams, potatoes, squash, peas as well.
Are they considered more healthy than regular white potatoes?
Yeah, so they do have a bit of a lower glycemic index. So what that means is they're digested a bit more slowly and don't impact the blood sugars as quickly or as dramatically as white potatoes do. But I believe that both can be a part of the diet. Both white potatoes and yams or sweet potatoes are a really rich source of potassium, which many of us don't get enough of. It's really important electrolyte for the heart. And especially if you're eating those potatoes with the skin, then you're getting that fiber as well.
I ask because I saw a recipe for curried sweet potato or yam soup, and it sounded like a pretty good combination.
That does sound good. I will also add that the sweet potatoes or the yams, they have that bright color, right? That orange,
Yes.
Yellow color. So that means they're rich in some additional carotenoids and sort of that, like the beta carotene, for example, which we definitely want to be incorporating in the diet. So I would say it kind of goes back to eating that rainbow. So we want that variety, and we want to be incorporating all those different colors in our diet. So probably a combination of both would be very reasonable.
Good, thank you.
Well, it's been wonderful. And the mindful eating, that was pretty interesting.
Okay.
And there's many nuances to all of this I can see, and how quickly things are absorbed or how slowly. So I think it's been really useful learning exercise for us. And nutrition is so important to us for living with cancer. So thank you so much.
You're very welcome.